What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Chu, here in the manhole, here to talk fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. And you guessed it right, that's my best ball buddy over there. Very excited to have him. You know him. I think you love him. I do. At tdaily11 on Twitter. Tyler, how you doing, brother?
If I could quote one of your previous podcast guests, Jacob Ridgway, and I's good friend, John Hayes, I am currently broken, bloodied, and bewildered. And we can maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, but excited to be here. You guys had a great episode last week, and so I'm just hoping to keep that train rolling and give us some momentum going into this season. Talk some best ball as we transition out of that season, and as most people start to get into redraft. I think you've got an auction draft later tonight. I'm extremely jealous as someone who's dwindled their fantasy exposure down to 3 total leagues in the form of 2 redraft and 1 dynasty. I pine for the days where I had more free time to crank out, be in 10 redraft leagues, but it does make it a little bit more, shall we say, in the concentration, it makes it just much more exciting for those 2 drafts. I obviously look forward to our redraft and our rookie draft and dynasty, but redraft just has a different kind of excitement and buzz to it. So,
yeah, I feel like the redraft piece, once you start doing dynasty, redraft kind of feels like, oh, I'm not screwed over by how terribly I've been running this team for a couple of years. I can just get a completely fresh slate. And that could just be me based on how one of my dynasty teams has been doing. I think that you may be familiar with, but who knows? This could be the year.
Every year, baby. It's like the Chicago Cubs. You just keep putting those long shot bets in, and then one year, it's all going to change.
That's right. So I know we talked with Jake on last episode talking about his soon to be baby, and you, of course. So 4.5 months, just about for Lil Will.
About right on the nose. Yep.
Boom. So how's it been going so far? What's the biggest surprise thus far, whether it be like, as compared to Emma or just the simple addition of another child kind of in the mix?
The biggest surprise so far would definitely be how much different it is changing a diaper on a male baby than a female baby. Had to get adjusted to that one quick. And he's got his little fire hose under control a little bit more so than when we first brought him home from the hospital. There were several days early on where I was getting number 1 and number 2 on me, oftentimes, but he's kind of tempered that down a little bit. So that was a big early change. And then just, it's a cliche, but just every kid's different. And it's, we were extremely fortunate with Emma in that she was just, by this point, she had been sleeping through the night almost for like a month. I mean, she was a very chill baby and just, never gave us problems with eating, never gave us, and I say all that it's not like Will is this terrible, terrible boy. I love him. He's the cutest little guy, but he's challenging in his own little ways. But he's also extremely special because, as you know, and I just found out, there's something very, very special about a father and his son. So there have been some big differences, but I would say the biggest of which that we're going through right now, and coming back to the broken, bloodied, and bewildered comment from before, is that he just does not want to sleep through the night right now. So you and I were texting earlier today about that I was going to be running on some sort of combo of caffeine and bourbon. I missed out on my caffeine hit because it was a busy day at work, but I will not miss out on my bourbon. So
there you go.
But he'll fall asleep for probably a good 4 or 5 hours on the front end, and then for the last few weeks he's been up every 45 minutes to an hour from like 1 a.m. until like 6:30. So Mom and I are running on limited brain capacity today. I've spaced out of several meetings and phone calls with customers where I have a train of thought, and I just have to be very upfront and say, you know what, I got 3.5 to 4 hours of sleep last night, so you're getting about 70% of me right now. You're just going to have to be okay with it.
Well, and even like the number, like the total amount of time is not even like reflective of like, oh, I got a total of 3 hours. I got it in increments, but it totals to 3 hours. So it's not like I got 3 restful hours. It's more of like it worked out, and I'm kind of awake at this point, but.
And if I could tell you a brief story that just is the icing on the cake for the way that the last few weeks have gone. So last night was another rough night with Will, as we were discussing. Emma decided to get in on the action as well. I don't know if she heard her brother getting some attention and decided she wanted some as well, but she started crying. She had thrown one of her stuffed animals over the side of the crib and was crying for it and was having a hard time settling back down. We get them both down. Will gave us a couple hours stretch toward the back end of the morning and woke up this morning and our dog just deuced all over the carpet in our room. So it's like, if it's not the human babies, it's the fur baby. And so she is, I think she's not feeling too well. She's knocked out right.
Oh man.
God. I think she's got a little touch of something. Not sure what's going on, but we're all just kind of, we said we're treading water right now. We're above water, but we're treading.
Well, fingers crossed for a speedy recovery for everyone in that household. It sounds like it is no consolation by any means, but if it makes you feel any better, I don't know if you remember back in our kindergarten days that I cut my hair in class. Finn decided to do the same thing today. Dead center, cut the bangs, and picture day is tomorrow.
Awesome.
So I don't really know how that's going to work out. It might be
how short did he cut it?
So if we're saying the bangs are normally this, the middle part is like here, and it's like this wide. So basically, it's going to have to be an aggressive side part.
I was going to say he's got like a Dwight Schrute look maybe in the making.
It's pretty much, yeah. So
a middle part and just.
You know what?
Just get him a pair of those those dollar store glasses that Jim gets in the one episode, and just this will be his Dwight Schrute picture here.
I would say what shade of Dijon or no, yeah, what shade of mustard is his shirt?
Yeah, spicy brown.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So we'll cross their bridge tomorrow. I'll definitely give you a wallet photo on that one. But so definitely sounds like some trials and tribulations there. But what is something you learned from Emma that's carried over to Will? I don't, everyone's different, but is there an activity, a process, anything like that has been helpful?
I think just overall, the realization that everything is a season with kids. Sometimes I think we can lose sight of that. Especially with your first, and specifically with your first in the first couple of years, because there are certain days where you're like, parenting's just is really not that hard, and then there are certain weeks, days, months, stretches where you're like, you're just kind of looking like, is this the rest of my life? Like, what do I, how am I going to get through this? And so I think I that perspective is important, because going through, or it's valuable to me now, because I remember times, like when we were, sleep training Emma to where she was, we were trying to get her to sleep through the night and she was crying so much, it was like, felt like this was never going to end. Or, maybe it was the times that we were having a hard time with her eating certain foods or something like that, being picky. It's just like, they change so quickly that things don't tend to last. So I know that and trust me, I'm getting towards the end of that rope a little bit with this particular season that we're in, but I do know that, it's not forever. And even stuff like, with potty training Emma, it's like the guys said at work, they're like, she's not going to poop her pants forever. Sometimes it feels like it, but she's not gonna.
Yeah, it definitely feels like I forget what the phrase is, like the days are long, but the years are short, that kind of thing, where it's like, in like week or multi-week or, like month, like stretches and seasons like you're talking about, there is just kind of when things get better. And then sometimes it's almost even more frustrating where it's like, it's a regression of like, dude, you already figured this out like 2 months ago. So what is happening right now? But then you get back out of that, and then it's like, oh wow, in the time that you regressed for this thing, you learned this other thing that you were never able to do. But it was just so frustrating. You regressed on this one thing. I didn't notice it. So it's always easy to say, just like, step back and enjoy it. But it's like, sometimes you are the worker at the convenience store in Superbad, and you just look down and you're like, fuck my life, But at the risk of doing an accent on that one, but just to jump into the meat and potatoes of this episode, best buds, best ball, and I'll just throw up the team here just so we can all get a taste. So this is a best ball draft that we collabed on. That is the first time in my life I've said the word collabed, and I hate it. I won't do it again. But just getting a look at this here, just give a quick overview of it, and then we can kind of dive into like some questions and just kind of like the clusters of picks. But so we ended up with 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. And I think I kind of how we went through it in terms of, it was on yours, so it was kind of just like bouncing back and forth of like screenshot, general thoughts of like what position are we going for? Like, can we afford to wait on this one? What is the player we wait on? So I think all of it was, none of it was really like a knee jerk reaction as much as it was like, here's a process, here's a cluster of players. What are we kind of looking at? And I thought it was a really cool exercise because you kind of end up maybe picking some people you hadn't normally, and like, drafts kind of fall differently once you kind of break the chain and like pick one different person. But going to your overall best ball exposure and experience, who is one or one of the highest exposure people that you have for best ball right now?
Well, 2 of them are Chicago Bears, which I don't necessarily love because that in recent memory has not been a strong franchise. But the 2 that I have the most exposure to are rhamondre and Khalil Herbert. Now, we'll see, what shakes out with Khalil Herbert. Did I'm sorry, I've been very busy at work. He survived the cuts, right? Did he make the cut for the Bears? We're
I
recording
believe
this
he
like
did.
the day.
I hadn't looked at the backfield. I don't know that. I mean, obviously Roshan didn't. I don't think Khalil got cut, so I don't know if Homer.
But yeah,
I'm trying to remember who else is behind
here,
him.
let me do a quick Google. I'm sorry to do this to you in the middle of the podcast, but
Very good. Yeah, I feel like they would have said something about that because while the rumblings about saying he was going to get traded, like they definitely would have said something if he got cut. I feel like.
I don't see anything on there. So, but there have been a lot of rumors that he was potentially a trade candidate. I know people have made the joke like the Cowboys are building a 0 RB structure this year to where they're rolling out the dust ball that is Ezekiel Elliott and also Rico Dowdell, who I've always said sounds like he starts for your local high school. But Rome Odunze, somebody that I'm super, super high on this year. I'm glad to see I'm up at 45% share on both of these players, which for everybody listening, I mean, I only have 11 drafts under my belt. So, we're looking at taking them in 4 or 5 drafts, but Rome Odunze is somebody that I'm super excited about. I thought he was in other wide receiver classes, absent guys like Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. I think Rome Odunze would have been the first wide receiver off the board in a lot of draft classes. And, I know you guys touched on it in your last episode in regards to, Jake being so high on Caleb Williams. And I could definitely see why. I don't know if somebody made the comment, it might have been Justice Beaver, but there's rumors about Keenan, being a little fat coming into camp this year. He's checking in north of 230. And so I think there's a non-zero chance that Rome Odunze might be neck and neck with DJ Moore in terms of targets on that team. We don't really know how Caleb Williams will operate in this offense yet, because I think it's going to, with the plethora of talent, he's just going to look a lot different than he did at USC, where he had to play a ton of hero ball. Whereas in Chicago, he's going to have, he has legitimate weapons all across the field. He has 2, maybe not top end tight ends, but 2 solid tight ends in Gerald Everett and Cole Kmet. And then obviously the aforementioned, DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. But I think that Rome Odunze's talent will certainly rise to the top. And in best ball, I would love to take shots on somebody that maybe I don't have to like him, that, in a 3 receiver triumvirate where you're not sure, one guy might get left out on a weekly basis. Best ball makes it easy because then, I don't have to pick those weeks to start him in my lineup. I just enjoy the ones that he is the one that pops off, and I think he'll have a good handful of those games.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the ones ahead in terms of just the Marvin Harrison and the Malik Neighbors, those are kind of the not easy, but in the sense of like it's pretty clear to see the path of like what the target share is going to be. Their glaring lack of competition around them. Certainly Marvin Harrison with the quarterback he has. Maybe Malik Neighbors not quite as much, but with Rome Odunze, in most any other draft, I mean, just the talent level that he is. I mean, especially coming off of that Washington team that also had a number of talented receivers on it by itself. And I think we'll be, it'll be pretty interesting to see over the next couple of years how each of those that trio of receivers does from that Washington team. But yeah, it's funny to think it was only mere years ago that it was the two-lane phenom Darnell Mooney was leading that Bears squad in the wide receiver room, and he is now the number 2 in Atlanta, and now we've got this tremendous combo of receivers.
We'll get to talk about Mooney later. Sorry.
Which, excitingly enough, like we talk about, Mooney used to be the number 1 in Chicago. He flamed out more or less, and now he's in a could be very good position on a different team years down the road. So it's just very interesting, year to year, how tremendously, how the big swings of what can happen in fantasy. And I'll throw mine in there. So it is one of the guys that we did end up getting, and I knew I liked him, but I didn't realize I liked him this much. So in 50% of my drafts, I don't know the exact total number of drafts, but it could very well be 10 or something like that. David Montgomery. So he is. It kind of seemed like no matter where I started, if it was going quarterback a little bit sooner, where I attacked tight end, it seemed like he just kind of kept falling to me at certain points where it was like I could use another running back, or at that point it's like why not? Because I feel like at a certain point, maybe after that, it was like, well, if I wait till my next pick, I might as well just continue to wait and just get the dart throws of the Ty Chandlers and the depth guys that I feel like can get some opportunity. So I think it's kind of just that's how it fell, and I wasn't specifically trying to go get him, but I mean he's locked and loaded for a good volume there and a good usage with between the tackles and red zone usage as well.
Yeah, with underdog being a half-point PPR too, touchdowns are a little bit more weighted than some of these receiving backs, so he certainly got that touchdown upside. We've seen that.
Oh yeah, and the last question before we get into the clusters of picks themselves, but what was your favorite pick, whether it be because of value or just a player you haven't gotten to pick in this draft that we did?
Can you put the board back up? Because I've got a couple, but I kind of wanted to just glance at ADP and see, if we got what I would consider a steal. I mean, I think it might be low hanging fruit, and I know it's a top pick, but I think you and I are both so high on Jalen Hurts this year. I don't think that the tush push is going anywhere, and I loved the fact that we got him and then eventually rolled it into a little bit of a Philly stack, because I just think that with that offense now being under Kellen Moore's tutelage, I think that AJ Brown, it's tough to comp like guys that have already succeeded and compare them how coaches have utilized other players. But I just can't help myself thinking like AJ Brown's going to slide all over the field like CeeDee Lamb was, and maybe they're going to throw him in, use him in the slot a bit like they have in Dallas when Kellen Moore was there. So really like getting Jalen Hurts, just because in best ball I really prefer to try to get a quarterback early, and it just made sense with us grabbing AJ Brown at pick 9.
Yeah, I think this was one of my favorite ones from the standpoint of the stacks that we ended up getting. I know that we can get to in a little bit of one of the stacks that we were hoping was going to be, I guess what you'd call a mega stack, but the tight end position was ripped from our hearts. But we'll address that in a second. But in lockstep with that Philly offense, I think with what happened last season with the rumblings, the entire offseason, really even going into now, keep talking about the disgruntled stuff between Hurts and the coach or coaching staff. Hurts reaching out to Wink Martindale in the playoffs, and I mean that just seems like a savvy move, but whatever. But I think overall, yeah, Kellen Moore going there. I mean, the amount of weapons he's going to get to work with at this point, he's never had this quantity and quality at any point thus far. So very excited to see what he's going to do there. And my guy, ironically enough, as we were just talking about him, Darnell Mooney, not really where we got him that it was a tremendous value necessarily. It was more or less about where his ADP was. But if I remember correctly, this was within a week-ish after, or less than a week after the Rondale Moore injury had happened. So yeah, is that right? Yeah. So if anything,
yeah, we were drafting, I think, when that news broke. Obviously, it's a slow draft, but yeah, it was we went up and grabbed Mooney a little bit above ADP because of that news.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at that, it's like, the ADP would not have been reflective of like if it would have jumped up. Like, if anything, his ADP now could be even higher than where we picked him, let alone what the ADP says here. But I think he's in a tremendous spot. I'm not getting too high on the Atlanta offense as a whole in the sense of Drake London's not going to step in and be Justin Jefferson. Kyle Pitts, I think, is going to do better. Bijan Robinson, I think, is going to his floor, I think, can at least be what he did last season because Arthur Smith is not there to use a confusing amount of Tyler Algier and Johnny Smith and whatever the hell else he was doing. But I think it's going to be a good offense, and I think they could very well win the division. I think the Bucks edged them out, but it'll be close. But yeah, Mooney's is in a prime spot, and hopefully he gets back to working on the outside. He started that way in Chicago, and it kind of faded away for like more of a 50-50 split, but he's an outside guy. That's what he did in college. That's where he thrived early in his NFL career. So hopefully he gets back to that. We'll see. But looking over, kind of breaking these down kind of in just trios, like just, clumps of 3 for each of the picks, just anything that sticks out, whether it was like one that you really loved, one that you were shocked that you got, that we were able to get, maybe, pulling out a stack, that sort of thing, as we mentioned that we got a couple of those. So the first 3 picks we had A.J. Brown, Chris Olave, and Jalen Hurts. I know you, of course, spoke your good thoughts about Jalen Hurts, but anything else added to that trio?
Yeah, nothing in particular. I mean, I think we started out. I think we both knew we were going to pivot to running back after the Olave pick. So getting 2 top end wide receivers there, and AJ Brown and Chris Olave, you have to start 3 in underdog. So I feel really good about having those 2 guys out of that cluster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is the first time I've picked Olave. I'll have to look back at the exposure of what I've gotten, but yeah, with how that one fell, I mean, just tremendous comfort in getting 2 guys like that. Obviously, it helped that, I mean, just 2 picks later, we were able to get AJ Brown and lock in the stack right there. I think it's a very good stack to have. And of course, we'll get to another one that we get going here with this next trio. But yeah, Olave, for whatever you want to say Derek Carr is at this point in his career and whatever much more time he has there in New Orleans, Olave is the number 1 target. I know Rashid Shaheed is kind of coming along. I mean, outside of A.T. Perry, Taysom Hill doing literally everything. He might be valeting some of the cars at some point. I'm not sure. But it's Olave getting the lion's share of the targets. So he's a tremendous add there for us. With the next 3, so, we got our running back like what you were talking about after Hurts there. So we got Etienne, David Montgomery, and then Brian Thomas Jr. So you can see we got 2 Jags there, and then Montgomery, someone who apparently I'm pretty high on, as this would probably tick up my percentage a little bit to maybe 60 or not. I'm not a math whiz, but what are any thoughts on this trio here?
Yeah, I think we felt we needed to get our first kind of anchor running back. So ETN started, to build to where we, when we got around to I think it was the middle of the 6th round that we took Brian Thomas, and knew that we were going to open ourselves up to kind of a backdoor stack, if you will. I didn't necessarily. I think we missed on Devonta Smith in terms of adding him for a stronger Philly stack. And the other, there's kind of this gap in between candidates for that team, because you got AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Saquon Barkley, and Jalen Hurts that are all going within the first 3 rounds. So it's really hard to grab multiple pieces of that offense early on. And then the only other piece that's probably worth grabbing is Dallas Goedert. So we knew we wanted to start building towards something else. So Travis Etienne, somebody that I think personally people have pivoted maybe a little bit too far off of. He because he doesn't have the receiving upside. Obviously he had a strong season last year. I'm not sure what his positional finish was, but yeah, I just think overall that Jaguars offense is trending up as a whole. They have just way more weapons now. I think I'm super high on Brian Thomas Jr. And then we'll talk a little bit more about another guy that we got later for them too.
Yeah, I mean, with ETN, the offseason stuff has just been flooding with, but coach really wants to divvy up the duties. Tank Bigsby, he's looking really good. Like, I would hope he looks better than what happened last year, but I mean, I feel like, I don't know if at any point he officially did, but I thought he got dethroned by Dearness Johnson at some point. I don't think JaMychal Hasty is still on the squad anymore, or it wasn't last year, but that is kind of how it was looking, where it was like kind of by necessity. It's like, well, Etienne just has to do this. And I mean, I think he performed pretty admirably. I think, like you were saying about the maybe lack of receiving upside, he kind of feels like a Leonard Fournette, not in his running style, but in a he maybe doesn't have like tremendous receiving upside, but then by the end of the year, just with the workload he gets, you're like, what? Wait, how many targets did he get? Like it just kind of builds up, throughout the season. And I think with that offense, hopefully taking a step forward, uh, I would like to think that, I mean, Etienne is definitely going to be a big piece of that. And I was not tremendously high on Brian Thomas Jr., but not for the sense of, I think he can do, one thing tremendously well. And I think that, what he and Gabe Davis are going to kind of tag team those kind of the same duties, the Zay Jones type role. And that is not a diss. It is a very important role. It just happens to have done by Zay Jones in the past. But I think that he's maybe a little more raw, more limited in what he does route wise. But I mean, he's a physical phenom, and they locked up their quarterback obviously with Trevor Lawrence. So I think there's comfort there in giving him a couple more weapons. T-Law's locked up. Etienne's still there, obviously. Evan Ingram is still there. I know that's kind of like saying Voldemort because he was taken from us, I believe. But yeah, and of course Montgomery can't go without saying that. Loved getting him, especially after Etienne. I think there's a comfort there just in the workload, and like you said, half PPR. So he feels, the weekly upside I think is there if he is able to vulture a couple of touchdowns. But overall, it's just at this point you get the good receivers. Why not have Etienne and Montgomery? And jumping over to the next trio, all right, they're getting a little less sexy, but still pretty solid. So we've got Jordan Addison, Rhamondre Stevenson, and Tyjae Spears. So any thoughts on these three?
Yeah, I mean, legal cases aside, this is a football podcast, so we'll let the other people debate about the morals regarding the Jordan Addison pick. But it just seems likely to me that he's probably not going to get suspended. I can't remember when his court date is, but it's somewhere, I think, like mid-season. And I know there's questions at quarterback, especially less questions now with the injury to JJ McCarthy. But I think Sam Darnold has shown in the past that he's at least serviceable. I think he's supported a strong wide receiver one. He supported DJ Moore in Carolina. And I think that overall, I just believe in that system in Minnesota, and I think that to me that's a value pick there. I think I'm not sure what his ADP is now, but I think it was sort of drifting back when we were drafting, and we're like, listen, I mean, he's kind of here. We weren't exactly sure what else to do, so let's grab another wide receiver talent. And then as far as the other two, I'll be honest, I'm not super excited about the Rhamondre pick, but in best ball, I'd rather have guys that are probably going to put me up consistent production as opposed, you kind of just have to balance that, layer that in your roster where it's like there are guys that have the pop weeks in them, and there's somebody coming up into the next group that a couple guys I think in the next group we can talk about in that regard. But I think Rhamondre is somebody that, like, unexcitingly, like, I have no interest in him in redraft personally, because I think he's probably going to roll out like a ton of 6 to 13 point outputs, and like the ones, the performances north of 20 that I like to try to shoot for out of my running backs probably aren't there for Rhamondre this year. Maybe I'm super off on that. I hope I am for the sake of this best ball team. But and then Tyjae Spears, I think my rule of thumb right now with the Titans backfield is just pick whichever one lasts longer, because I'm not exactly certain what's going to happen between Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, but I do know that I think that offensive environment as a whole is a lot better this year than it was last year. There's just a lot more weaponry, and sure, that means that there's more mouths to feed, but I think that also just means that I think overall there's going to be more touchdowns available. So I'll take a shot on him all day long at that price.
Yeah, I mean, Tyjae, it seems like a lot of the talk has truly been just a 1A, 1B, or even sincerely just this is a committee. And I think looking at what they both do, they are much more substitutes. They are much more substitutes for one another than they are complements. But I mean, I'm curious to see what this offense looks like. Obviously, they added a couple, some help at receiver, including Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd coming over with his coach from Cincy. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a good mix of talent there. And rhamondre, he's someone who I like, but only because of the value in terms of how far down he ends up being, considering he is the clear cut number one. He can do a little bit of everything in that backfield. I know they got Antonio Gibson. Not, he's never going to be what he was the first, I think it was 2 years or so, a top back, really just because of volume. But rhamondre, he will get the opportunities, but again, he's going to have those old school Lamar Miller type lines of like the volume's there, but the efficiency is dog shit. And really, in terms of them being in scoring position, I don't really know how often that's going to happen. And he's not exactly a Kenneth Walker, Khalil Herbert type of home run threat running the ball. So, kind of like you were saying, it's a good floor one. And Addison, I think, like what we talked about with getting those receivers before, Addison was our fourth receiver. So it definitely felt like not kind of playing with house money, but I think we felt pretty secure. And I looked it up. His court date is October 7th, assuming nothing changes. So that is, into the season. That at least is, we don't know what's going to happen with that, but that would end up being our fourth receiver. And like you were saying, I mean, Sam Darnold, he's going to be the guy this season with the J.J. McCarthy injury. But, I mean, I do think Justin Jefferson's going to be force-fed, but at certain points, they're just going to blanket him. And, I mean, Sam Darnold is a poor man's Ryan Fitzpatrick, so there's going to be certain games when it's awesome. And that's exactly what you want for best ball. So
I love that.
Well, so we've got three more trios here, and I know you were talking about some exciting upside for these three here. So we've got Trevor Lawrence, so we completed that stack there, or kept it going, if you will, because we got Gabe Davis after that, and then we got the one, the only Darnell Mooney after that. So thoughts on this trio?
Yeah, I love this cluster of picks. I mean, getting Trevor Lawrence to go with the Etienne and Brian Thomas, and then wrapping it up with Gabe Davis. I mean, I think we're just gonna pick up a ton of spike weeks with that offense. I think that Trevor Lawrence, much like Etienne, is somebody that I think people were a little too high on last year, and now we're a little bit too low on this year. And so I kind of want to buy the dip on those guys. And then Darnell Mooney, I think, it just made sense for us to go up and get him after we got the injury news. And so I think, he's going to be playing with the best quarterback he has of his career, and he's not going to be the focal point of the offense. And I think those are two things that are, sealing up. And again, two wide receivers that I probably would shy a bit more away from in redraft, because I don't want to have to try to pick their spike weeks. So perfect for us here.
Yeah, it feels pretty incredible getting Trevor Lawrence this late, considering what we both feel that this offense is going to look like this year. And Gabe Davis, ironically, I can't remember the number, but he's probably the next most frequent person I'd picked for my best ball drafts. But I've never picked Trevor Lawrence, so it was never for the stack reason. It was just I think his value is just too good at this point. Going into last season, the season prior, if that continuity makes any sense, that was his 52 fantasy point playoff performance. I mean, playoff in terms of the actual NFL playoffs, not fantasy playoffs. But and that's when people were kind of projecting out, but what could this look like for next year? It's like, well, he can't do that every game. He is just doing what Gabe Davis does 3 times a year. It just happens to be in the playoffs on a huge scale, and it was incredible. So now I feel like he's fallen back down to earth, where it's like, oh, this is like a palatable value for him, versus last season people were trying to prop him up like, could he be, it's like it's him and Diggs. It's like, no, it's not. It's Gabe Davis. We know who he is, and especially on this team, he and Brian Thomas Jr., we have both of them, of course. They're going to be doing a lot of the same thing, but they both do that thing pretty well. And I think, especially for the best ball's sake, kind of like you were saying with this trio, it's exciting to get the two here with T-Law and Gabe Davis. Mooney, at this point in the draft, I think that's pretty good value for the player that he is and the upside he could have, considering that's the 12th pick at this point. So I can cluster these last 6 together unless there's someone that you're really itching to get. But so we've got Luke Musgrave. That would be our first tight end we got. We got Noah Fant, because you got to go back-to-back tight end. We got iosivas, and we got Colby Parkinson. Why not another tight end? Elijah Mitchell, RIP. He's not dead, just his injury. And Tyler Boyd to finish it up. So those 6 really exciting picks. Thoughts on any of those?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the ideal thing for me in best ball, but if I do miss on some of the top, 6 to 8 tight ends, I'm liable to just wait, and that's what happened to us. We had that just horrible person who used up probably 7 hours and 50 minutes of the 8-hour draft clock, and then sniped Evan Ingram from us
Yep.
to ruin our super Jacksonville stack. So after that, I think we both agreed we were just going to punt and let's grab some guys that we think might just be touchdown scorers on a week-to-week basis, and we don't have to find it. We'll just let it come to us. I think Colby Parkinson, someone you are high on, so I'll let you speak a little bit more to that. I was no fan, and then like you said, RIP to our Elijah Mitchell pick already. On season-ending IR now, but excited a little bit about getting Yoshi just because I think the path is clear. Cincinnati has never utilized the tight end, and Mike Gesicki is like that guy that everyone talks about year over year. That's like, oh, this is going to be year somebody utilizes Gesicki a little bit more, and I just think that the path seems to be somewhat clear for Iosivas because not hearing a lot of good things out of Caleb Burton in training camp. So, yeah, not anybody that I think is going to win us this league, but guys that I think will give us a solid floor on some weeks where maybe some other guys falter.
Yeah, I mean, once it's getting to 13 through 18, the fact that I think getting Musgrave at this point is not a bad get. I know we're hedging that with we need to get 3 tight ends just because ideally one of them scores a touchdown between the 3 of them every week, which is entirely possible. I know Tucker Kraft had been dealing with the offseason injury. I think he might be back though. But Musgrave, I think, has a reasonably secure spot there, even if he's sharing duties with Kraft a little bit. Noah Fant, he had a fluky 0 touchdown season last year. It's a new regime there. You know, I do believe that at a minimum he will get a couple of touchdowns, but also his usage is through the roof. There's clear trust in him. The other guy we got in Colby Parkinson was shipped out of town. But a Colby Parkinson, a guy that I like tremendously. I'm insane. I actually have him as my tight end 12 in terms of where I think he can finish.
Let's go.
And what is somewhat, outside of like the top 3, top 5 guys, it's just a huge, half point between each person kind of tier, maybe. After that, like the next 10, next 12. So saying he's the tight end 12 is maybe not tremendous, but considering he's never even cracked the top 20, it might be a bit of a reach there. But he's stepping in for Tyler Higbee. Higbee is on the pup. Even when he comes back, he'll be, eased back into it. And I think Parkinson will be the 6'7", 250, just athletic behemoth of a human being, tremendous red zone threat. And unlike when we were talking about Rhamondre, like what opportunities is he going to get to score? Parkinson's going to get a lot of opportunities to score with that offense. And I think he's going to be a great red zone threat with Kupp and Nakua, getting them down the field with Kyron Williams, and then Parkinson can kind of finish them off. That's what she said. But yeah, unfortunate for Mitchell. I know that's been the story of his career, really after his first year. And yeah, Jordan Mason stepping in for him, I suppose. But yeah, overall, I think it was a really good draft. I like the 2 stacks that we did end up getting. I'm comfortable with the tight ends. I know it was just taking a couple really at the end there, but I don't think we sacrificed too much. But yeah, any thoughts in closing on Best Buds, Best Ball?
Just can't wait to collect our check.
That's right. Make it out to Father Dynasty. Just kidding. It's on Tyler's account. Make it out to Tyler. Well, all in all, so one thing I do want to ask you before I give you the final word as the guest, of course, give me a viral viewpoint. I know Jake had a nice and spicy Chicago Bears pass catchers take there, but anything that you got, I forgot that it does fireworks when I do this. Anything that you've got, yeah, it's great. When it comes to a 2024 fantasy season type of hot take.
Can it be about an individual
player, team, and yeah, anything?
Okay, so I looked at this to see how hot it would be before we recorded. I didn't know how hot it was, but according to current ADP, it appears to be quite hot. In that I am going to plant my flag and say that Malik Neighbors will outproduce Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going right now at about 16, according to the data that I'm looking at. And I believe Malik Neighbors is going at 48. And I know why. The overall the offensive environment in Arizona is going to be probably a lot better. I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that you'd rather have Kyler Murray and James Conner and Trey McBride and Greg Dortch and some of these other guys. People are expecting Michael Wilson potentially to take a leap forward. But those are all the reasons that I think I'd rather have Malik Neighbors in that, he's the only guy. I mean, he's it. He might actually be like a top 3, top 5 receiver in terms of targets in the NFL this year. And there were certain people before the draft, not necessarily me, but I mean, just some people that were, I think, saying that certain NFL teams liked Malik Neighbors more than they liked Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he's a tremendous talent, somebody that just can take the top off of a game, put the ball in his hands and see what happens. And I'm just going to bet on another LSU wide receiver having some good success early on in his career in a New York Giants blue uniform. So,
I mean, I'm in lockstep with you. I think that his opportunity is tremendous. Seeing what he did in the preseason, I understand this preseason. It's just him out there on an island and being able to kind of just get behind some good cornerbacks at that level. I think it's pretty tremendous this early on. And I do know at some point it may kind of shift to him getting blanketed a bit. But I do think with Dable, I do trust that they'll kind of like work back and forth with, Wan'Dale Robinson. Hopefully I know he's healthy, but hopefully he can stay, good throughout the season. So he can kind of work underneath and then it'll kind of help spread the field out a bit. So hopefully Neighbors can continue to work. And I mean, he's going to get a Deontay Johnson in Pittsburgh the last couple of years type of target share, I feel like. And regardless of how many picks Daniel Jones is going to throw in any game, they don't count against Malik Neighbors, and that will result in them needing to throw even more. So I do think he's going to get tremendous amount of work, and he's very talented. So no matter what Daniel Jones is going to do to hinder that ability for him to produce, I could definitely see that wide receiver 1 finish. So I love it. Well, guest gets the final word, as you always know, whether it be a shout out, a quote, anything you got on your mind. So let me know what the bourbon and the sleepless Tyler has on his mind.
I think just shout out to us. We've survived another off season. I've made it, I think, somewhat of an annual tradition. You typically have me on right somewhere around the start of football season. So I think if we go back and look, I'm just as excited about Virginia Tech football returning as I ever have been, maybe even more so this year with the cupboard not being so bare. Have Kyron Drones coming back, have 3, I think, NFL caliber wide receivers, guys that hopefully we'll be talking about on this podcast potentially in the spring, and Ollie Jennings, Jalen Lane, and Daquan Felton, and potentially a running back as well in Bashal Tootin. So I think the arrow is up for Virginia Tech football, and so I'm just really excited to take in a full slate this weekend, and then be in Blacksburg for week 2 for the home opener against Marshall. Go Hokies!
Oh yeah, well, glad to hear it. Glad to hear you're going to be in the area, and hopefully it's going to be following a Virginia Tech win. I would like to believe that will be happening. And yeah, it has been a little while since we've been able to actually get sincerely excited, not just like biasly excited about Virginia Tech football. So this, dare I say, could be the year. I don't know what that means exactly, but something's going to happen.
It will.
All right, brother. Well, hey, I appreciate it. Get your rest if possible. You get that collective 3.5, maybe even 4 hours if you're risking it.
We'll see.
All right, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah.